been in deep doo-doo had I not been able to come to the office during this
Would
pandemic.
you? The positive thing about working from home is I can work for 10 hours straight and nobody interrupts me.
Yeah.
That's the one positive.
Mine's not as electronic as yours. I need hard files and to look at.
Yeah. I think almost everything of mine now, not everything, but either somebody emailed me stuff electronically that I could find it, or it is electronic, like all of our purchase orders and our checks and all that stuff. I can see all that electronically.
I need a good quality copier and a scanner.
Yeah. You can't really do a law business effectively remotely.
But you only have to drive a mile and a half to get there, which is nice.
All right, Mike, we can't still see you.
You can't.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
You got to punch on that little video monitor in the bottom left-hand corner.
Okay. Let me see.
Going to plan for that for a year.
Is Gary on?
No. And I sent him, we just talked 15 minutes ago. And neither's Jen Lawson.
I didn't get any text messages from anybody, so.
Got 3 minutes. Oh, there's Gary trying to get in. Got him.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Oh, there's Jen.
Leslie.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. I'd like to call this regular board meeting to order on June 15th. If everyone could join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
to the United States of
of
America
America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
nation
under
under
God,
God, indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Veronica, when you're ready, roll call, please.
Hey. All right. Mr. Imes,
Here.
Mr. McCreary,
Here.
Mr. McInnes,
Here.
Mrs. McKay. Here. Mrs. Snyder.
Here. Thank you. We will start off with Dr. Irisi's report, opening of the schools.
Thank you, Leslie.
Uh-huh.
Make sure one on mute. Okay. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the opening of school on June 8th. Myself, the other county school superintendents, commissioners, sheriff, police, Mayor Schertzer, we met with the Marion Public Health Department and had some discussions about the start of school next year. And so we were advised by the Department of Health that at this point in time and the way the trends are going, that we should plan on opening school as usual on August 17th. So we did have some conversations about that. Obviously, we are putting into place plans for cleaning and sanitizing and whatever social distancing guidelines we continue to receive updates on. Adam Kunkel and his operations folks are fully aware of and up to date with any information that we receive from the health department and from the CDC. And so we are, again, planning on, really coming back to school in the fall. And so we messaged that out to our community in the form of a one call and got some really good feedback. We know that there are some parents that do have some concerns, and until a vaccine is actually discovered, that we will have to accommodate some of those kids, especially those who are somewhat at risk and have some compromised immune systems and those kinds of things. So we are certainly looking at an online option to make sure that we accommodate all of our students' needs. And as we progress and get more towards August 17th, and we know more about what the CDC regulations are and recommendations from public health, then we'll be able to message that out on a regular basis. And we will do that. Again, we try to keep the community informed, but we also want them to know that, you know, we do see a lot of changes in the recommendations. If you would have asked me probably 3 weeks ago if we were coming back to school or if we had any chance to come back to school full on, I would have highly doubted that. But at this point in time, and with those discussions and seeing the trends in Ohio, and thank goodness that Ohio did what they did to flatten the curve, and I think that we're going to pay off in the long run by being able to bring our students back to school full on face-to-face. We did also message to the community, thanks to the CARES Act, that we are able to purchase Chromebooks for our students. We know that through the surveys, which I'll talk about in a minute here, that many of our students struggled with devices. And even though we probably passed out 1,500 Chromebooks to our students, many of our students have, you know, there are multiple students in one family who really only have access to 1 or 2 devices. And so, you know, the ability for us to give a Chromebook to every student next year, regardless if we, you know, have to go to a remote learning situation or, you know, we're full on face-to-face, we can certainly use the technology and get our kids accustomed to learning online and what that looks like, and being able to integrate that technology into everyday classrooms will only benefit our students in the long run. And so it's a great investment for us, we think, and we're very excited about that. And I should also mention too that, you know, although we are planning on going back to school full on face-to-face, and Adam is working with his departments to make sure that cleaning and sanitizing are in place. Ben and Kelly are also working with their staffs to make sure that, you know, we have some online options. So should we see some spikes or, you know, some diagnoses within the district and we have to either quarantine a class or a building or even maybe the entire district for a 2-week period, I feel like we'd be much better prepared for that. And they're working on making sure that we have lessons online and that they're starting to develop, you know, some opportunities for our staff to engage in more professional development, which kind of leads me into the next section, the survey results. So as you are aware, we did surveys to our staff and to the community about this past 3 months and what the last 9 weeks of school actually looked like for families. So we wanted to make sure that we gathered some feedback on how we did. And I'll start with the staff first. And let me just say again, I think it's important to remember, I think it got lost as we moved on towards the end of the year, that we literally had 3 days to prepare for 3 months of being off school. And so again, you know, huge credit goes out to the staff who, you know, really, I mean, we are a face-to-face, we are not an online school, but our staff adapted and did what they could and worked diligently to make sure that lessons were prepared. And really most impressively is, you know, their diligence in making sure that they reach students, because we had quite a few students that, you know, we had a hard time making contact with. And at first, in the first week, I think we were probably over 400 students that we had not made contact with after the first couple weeks. And our staff made phone calls, they reached out. Some of them, I know that the staff over at Hayes went out in the neighborhood just to see if they could, you know, see the kids or something along those lines. And so they really worked hard to be able to do that. And so their survey results kind of reflect some of those kinds of things that, you know, lots of our staff spent time, especially with students and trying to navigate their way, whether they had access to the internet or not, especially for the first couple weeks. A lot of our staff spent that time, but they also did spend time on lessons. You know, they probably spent 75% of their time actually teaching, the other 25% either in preparation or, you know, making contact with students. Probably the biggest significant feedback that we got from the survey is our staff would love to have some more training on Schoology and Google Classroom and those kinds of things, not only how to navigate their way around it, but what does that look like and what are some best practices that we can implement within those lessons using those platforms. I should also mention that I think it was last week that Greg Rose, Dean of the Ohio State University at Marion, had a conference call, and we had some folks sit in on that. And some of the OSUM professors have offered to just have conversations with some of our high school staff about some things that they did and kind of bounce some ideas, because we do have some students with College Credit Plus too that we can support. So we're looking forward to having those conversations to help us better prepare for the future as well. And then just a note on some results that we got from the families. I was pleased that we had over 1,000 responses to our surveys, which is really good. It's a really good percentage to get back some feedback. So we can really take some of this information and it can really help us. So it's interesting that 75% of our students were able to access online assignments. And so, the 25% actually either had an issue with a device or access to the internet. And so we know that, there's at least a quarter of our students that, should we go remote, we do have to make sure that they do have access. Now, we think the one-to-one initiative will help with that, so we can focus and narrow in on, those students that don't have internet access. And we have, I think, a lot more resources to go to, especially now, should we have to do that in the future. I think the positives that we got back from the surveys is that our families and our staff appreciated the amount of communication that came from the district. And so that's something to walk away, proud of, that we tried to do the best job we could of keeping our families and our staff informed, as we know that things had changed on a regular basis. We needed to make sure our families understood, where the district was heading, what we were doing. When we switched from the paper and pencil options that we had to completely online, we made sure we got out enough information to our families to help them navigate their way through that. So that was probably the biggest positive feedback that we got from our families, is that they really enjoy the amount of communication, which tells us too that we need to continue and build on that in the future to make sure that we communicate with our families more and more on a regular basis. Obviously, some of the biggest obstacles that our families have, and this is one of the keys, I think, for us in planning for next year. I mean, many of our families struggle with their students being home, finding adequate daycare, adequate, just for folks to be around to watch the students while they're working, if they were working. Definitely the biggest obstacle was not, the lessons themselves or the internet access, but really a lot of our families struggled with, having a job and making sure that their kids were taken care of properly. And again, our teachers did a really good job of helping some of those families and trying to point them in the right direction on some resources that were available within the community. And so I feel good about, the results that we got back and able to take some of this experience and really help us better prepare. Let's hope that we don't have to prepare for something like this again in the future, but I feel like we'll be much better prepared moving forward. So if there's no questions for me, that's my report for this evening.
All right. Any questions for Ron?
Ron, I had a couple of questions about how it may look depending when we open school face-to-face and what it might look like, assuming that we still have the recommendations in place from the health department and CDC. For instance, face coverings, what are you looking at for that? The physical distancing in classrooms. That's some of our classrooms are going to be difficult to rearrange to really accommodate social distancing as it's explained right now. And are there any ways that you're going to limit density indoors and outdoors and can control the flow of traffic here and there? Lunchroom, for instance.
So thanks for that question, Gary. It's an important question that we have been mulling over. And again, as we were looking at planning in the next year and maybe even some of the blended models that were out there and starting to put those plans in place and have those conversations. Right now, the recommendation from the health department is with school-age children that they understand, especially in communities like ours, that we're struggling back and forth with making sure that the students are in the buildings full time and have access to our facilities. And and doing the best job we can with those recommendations. What they highly recommend, more than the social distancing aspect, is the cleaning and sanitizing. And so that we have to have sanitizer in place. We have to have the ability to wash things down on a regular basis. I think that, across the country, and especially from the health department in the state of Ohio, they recognize that in any district, especially those urban districts like ours, the social distancing, that we currently had in place would be very difficult. But as we see more and more of some of those restrictions relaxed, and from, again, just the conversations with the health department, is that they feel like the cleaning and sanitizing would be the most important part of that, especially for young people. I don't know that they'd recommend that for, older folks, but in school situations, I feel like it's adequate to have, what the cleaning and sanitizing aspects. Now, we are also, looking at lunchrooms and things like that, where there are more gatherings than 20 to 25 students. So take Grant, for example, we are looking at possibly having an outdoor space in the courtyard. Again, these are just things, none of this has been solidified. And as we continue to receive information from the health department, we will adjust accordingly. But, those conversations are taking place within each building.
Ron, has there been any thought to ending the face-to-face classes at Thanksgiving time and then doing finals and other things online in December? I know a lot of the universities, that's what they're looking at, but that's probably, like OSU has a ton of people that leave their campus and then come back from foreign countries and other states. But I didn't know if there was any thought, or do we just have to kind of play that by ear to see what happens?
No, I think, our focus right now is, and again, based on the discussion we had with the health department, we didn't really come up with these ideas on our own. We wanted to make sure that, we are in contact with them. And we have another meeting scheduled at the end of this month just to get any updates, but Tracy Kinsler has sent out regular updates to us. Anytime something changes, we are notified. But again, the recommendation for us is that we need to have school as normal, but we need to be prepared for an issue if there is, an outbreak or a diagnosis or something along those lines, to be prepared for that. I think people realize that it would almost be impossible to have school in some of those social distancing guidelines. I was very, very concerned about transportation. Originally the first release from the CDC and even from the Ohio Department of Health was that they felt like they could only put one student per seat in a bus. So that would completely change, the dynamic of how we transport students. Now, they feel like, again, the sanitizing and having those kinds of things. So when kids, get on the bus, their hands are sanitized, or, we even considered some of the infrared scanners that are out there to be able to provide, some of that access. But, now they're kind of even saying they're cutting back on, the fever and some of the symptoms that not necessarily are aligned. And obviously we're recommending to our families, if there's a fever or some of those symptoms in the home, we're recommending that, they keep their kids home. But, again, I know everybody's a little bit surprised, as was I, that, the recommendation right now is that they understand it'd be very difficult to have school under some of those circumstances. So we should plan on having school as normal, but be prepared again to make an adjustment if we need to.
Well, I'm sorry, but to me, that attitude is very troubling. And I'm going to support whatever you and your team recommend to us. But I will say it scares me to death.
Yeah, I understand that, Gary. I'm not, believe me, this situation hit home for me very well. I'm not a proponent of any of the issues about, we've been told from day one that we are to work with our local health department and follow their guidelines, which we are completely and totally committed to. And so, and I understand from our families, the issues that some of our students faced during this time period. And a lot of our kids were at risk being at home just because of the, family situations and issues and those kinds of things. So, trying to balance those kinds of things is something that we're concerned with. But again, if those, as those guidelines come to us and they change, we are, ready and willing to adapt to whatever those recommendations are.
Ron, with the face coverings, you may have mentioned it and I missed it. Are they're not mandatory?
No, they are not.
No. Okay.
And actually, there is a large group effort across the state of Ohio to make sure that masks are not mandatory, especially in elementary buildings.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. If not, we will move to the Assistant Superintendent's report on policy updates.
Before we get to policy updates, I just wanted to give just a brief update on enrollment. So just specifically as it applies to kindergarten and preschool. So I given you an update last month, just that we were a bit behind what we had been in the past with kindergarten and preschool enrollment. And we were trying to kind of decipher what may have been leading up to those numbers. So we've worked with the committee to try to kind of think that through a little. As of right now, we're at 209 students that are registered for kindergarten and 108 students registered for preschool. So those numbers are down slightly from what they've been in the past. It's sort of hard to say if those aren't accurate numbers. Obviously, we don't know who's out there for kindergarten and preschool, but they're lower than what they've been in the past. So a couple of things that we are looking to do is just sort of a remarketing of our registration, continuing to open that for our students. So you'll start to see billboards, you'll start to see yard signs, you'll start to see flyers going back out, renewed social media campaigns. So if you hear anything about that, we are still open for registration for kindergarten and preschool. One of the things that we have found via social media is that there might be a little bit of confusion between kindergarten screening and registration. So people might be looking for that language of like, when is kindergarten screening? Because we've done registration and screening during the same time at the buildings. So really screening is not required. It's certainly something that is beneficial for teachers to have that information ahead of time, but it's not required. So registration is definitely something that is helpful to have ahead of time, so that students aren't just sort of walking in with their backpacks on the first day of school. So we're trying to gather as much of that information as possible. So like I said, we're going to put that back out there, and we have people at the Welcome Center that are ready to answer any questions on both of those. So just so that you have that information. In terms of our, before I move past that, does anyone have any questions about kindergarten or preschool registration?
I do not.
Okay.
Anybody else?
So I will, so in terms of our policies, we did have some updates on policies. This round, we were very employment focused for the most part. And obviously you have a copy of the policies and some of the recommended changes to those. So I won't go into detail, but just some of the things that I'd like to bring to your attention in terms of the employment side. You'll notice that from the administrative, certified, and classified, you'll notice some language in there that removes the highly qualified language to make sure that it's up to date with our current ODE language. But you'll also notice that it specifies that it is the requirement of the superintendent to notify and be sure that those administrators and classified and certified folks have their license prior to being issued payment. And so that is new language in the policies. And there is some internal process implications with that policy. So that may change somewhat what you might see on board agendas moving forward. You'll also notice that the pupil activity permit, so that falls in that curricular and co-curricular. You'll notice one of the components to that policy is making sure that the pupil activity permit is in hand, if you will, prior to that coach or a supplemental works with students. And so that is going to be, that's in policy. So that's really important to note in the policy. You'll notice that there is a policy that's got some pretty substantial changes in terms of CDL licensure. So those are our bus drivers. In terms of drug and alcohol testing, again, in terms of procedural and process implications internally, there'll be some implications there. There'll be some substitute licensure implications, and we'll continue to monitor that policy in particular. There were some policy updates as it applies now, but that was sort of pre-COVID, if you will. And so we're hearing, of course, that there may be some additional changes to that, although they may not be policy changes. Those may just be administrative guideline changes, but we will keep you up to date with anything that needs changed with that. And then finally, one of the more important policy changes, and I will allow the committee members to speak further on this one, is the graduation requirement policy. As you probably recall, a couple board meetings ago, we did make some adaptations to the policy. As you know, we had the requirement of 21 credits, which is 1 credit beyond what is required. And so we made that change and additional changes to that policy when we were faced with some changes from the COVID. But in terms of moving forward, there are some additional policy implications there. So like I said, I'll allow the other committee members to have any other further conversations when we get to the committee notes later on in the meeting. But those were some of the highlights from the policy updates. Was there anything that at this time that anyone would like to add from that meeting?
Nothing from me.
Are there any questions that I could answer about any of the policies?
I don't have any at this time.
Okay.
Anybody else?
That is my update.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
All right, next we will move on to informative presentation. Johnny Jackson's going to join us on equity and social justice and what's happening in the district.
Johnny is in the meeting. Johnny, are you there?
What's happening in the district?
There we go.
Oh, hello.
Hi, Johnny.
Johnny?
Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I was watching on YouTube so I could get in the right spirit to be with you all. I want to first say thank you for inviting me this evening to talk a little bit about equity and social justice. And I'll be as brief as possible to kind of set the framework for what we're talking about. I was asked by Dr. Arusi and Miss Lawson to draft a certain type of like a social justice inspired resolution for all of the events that have been happening around the United States, from the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in the state of Georgia, and to kind of stick with the kind of historical moment of what's happening now in the U.S., where departments of health and Board of Educations are issuing statements to condemn any type of racism. I felt very fortunate to be able to craft a resolution. So I do want to say thank you to both Dr. Arusi and Ms. Lawson. I do want to also say thank you to a few people that are watching with us, Pastor Peterson and Pastor Jackson and Ms. Dyer. I know that they are out there rooting us on as we kind of do this work. So I do have a couple things just to kind of talk about. The first is my grandmother, Willie Ree Goodman, which I'm sure that Coach Mack remembers. She worked for Marion City Schools for about 15 to 20 years. She was at first a domestic worker in Hollandale, Mississippi, and then she moved up here with her children and decided to work for Marion City Schools as a cook and also a custodian ever at Pearl Street. My mother at Etesta Hudson put all 5 of her children through Marion City Schools. So I come here standing on the shoulders of people who really believe in Marion City Schools because they either worked here or they put their kids through Marion City Schools. So I always have to start off by saying really that piece. Some of our real objectives since I've come on board to Marion City Schools have to do with doing work around social justice and anti-racist work as a school district, and training our teachers and our administrators, and really cutting edge theories and practices. So when we're thinking about social justice work, part of the resolution is really to think about how we might steep a lot of our work in social justice and anti-racism, and commit to what a lot of us say are Black freedom struggles throughout the United States. So before Dr. Arusi and Ms. Lawson asked me to craft a resolution for Marion City Schools, I was actually in conversation with Tracy Kinsler, who is the director or executive director of Marion Public Health, and asking her to create a statement that condemned any type of anti-Black racism, and also make a statement that racism is a public health issue. And I did this because I watched what was happening with Franklin County and Columbus City boards of health. So I think that Marion City Schools and creating this resolution actually stands in line to make history. There's only really one other board, which is Akron Public Schools, who have made a statement that said that racism is a public health and public education issue. So I think that we also are kind of making history. Our work in diversity, equity, and social justice, I've really had a lot of freedom in Marion City Schools to do my work, for thanks to Dr. Arusi and also Ms. Jen Lawson. Some of the work that we were already doing was around racial implicit bias testing for our teachers. Also ongoing social justice practices and helping our teachers understand some of those cutting edge theories and practices. So I'm very grateful for that work, and I'm very grateful for you all to be accepting our resolution and fighting against racism, and also working with social justice as a theoretical framework. And the last thing that I do want to say is that ongoing we have had 2 social justice book clubs, one that was situated at Benjamin Harrison Elementary, where we worked to think about these type of deeply social justice issues around racism and the intersection of school. And now we actually have a book club where, amazingly, about 25 to 30 teachers and administrators are reading a text called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So again, I'm very fortunate to be working here at Marion City Schools, but I also see us as working continuously to fight against racism by ways of education and training our teachers that they are part of the larger fight and movement for Black lives and also for social justice education. So I'm very grateful and I'm thankful to you as a Board of Education for wanting to review this resolution. And thank you to Pastor Jackson and also Pastor Jackie and Ms. Dyer. And thank you to Dr. Irusi and Ms. Lawson. And I'm looking forward to continue to fight with you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Very well said.
Guys, if I can kind of jump in just here for a second while Johnny's still with us, and let me reiterate what Johnny said. And I know that Sean and Tara and Jackie are all actively involved and support Marion City Schools. I had an opportunity over the last year or so to meet with them on a regular basis, just to have conversations about how their perceptions in the community and what we're doing to make sure that all of our students feel safe and comfortable here in Marion City, and that's to me one of the most important things we can do for our kids is to make sure that every student who walks through those doors feels safe and comfortable in Marion City. And so all of the things that Johnny has been working on in collaboration with those other folks, I think we've just kind of got started, and I'm really excited about the work that is going to continue. I can tell you that Johnny and I had a conversation again over the last couple of days about how we're going to engage students specifically in this topic, so that we can get feedback directly from them, so that we can hit some issues head on and make sure that we know what's happening in our district on a regular basis, and so that we can make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure again that those kids feel safe and comfortable. Just had some conversations today with Marion Police Department, and so we are going to have ongoing conversations about our students and our resource officers and how we can work together. And so I give a big shout out to BJ again for having that conversation with us and ready and willing to sit down and work with us to make sure our kids feel safe. So thank you to Johnny and Tara and Jackie and Sean out there listening. Appreciate all you guys, and I'm really excited about this resolution. Thanks, Johnny, and for doing that for us. And so, as we get to that, the next item on the agenda, I enthusiastically recommend that this resolution be passed by Marion City Schools.
Thank you, Ron, for that. I would just also like to say, as a board, we would be remiss as an educational governing body if we did not recognize these social issues. So I'm very happy for us to be moving forward on the resolution as well. I think over the past 3 weekends, our community members have come together of all races and religions to call for peace, justice, and equality for all. And I think it's also, like you said, Ron, very important to acknowledge the work of our police department in our community. Chief Collins and his officers have done an amazing job by building relationships in our community and trust, but also the other leaders in our community that really have shown up are our current teachers, our staff, administration, and our students, past and present. I think that's something I know I'm very proud of for those individuals that have had their voice be heard over the past 3 weekends. So I'm looking forward to it. And does anybody else have anything? Okay. So as we go into passing the resolution, Johnny kept mentioning our resolution. So I know I had all intention of sending all the board members, lines to read and highlight and all this, but if I didn't get around that, but if we could just all kind of take part in this resolution, and when one board member stops, another one chimes in and continues to read. I'm more than happy, Dr. Irusi, Jen, Veronica, Johnny, to chime in as well, so we can all have a part in this resolution, if everyone's okay with that. Okay, all right. So I will start off, and we will go until we end. Subject B, the Educational Equity and Social Justice at Marion City Schools. Dr. Irusi recommends that the Board of Education adopt the following resolution. Marion City Schools Resolution on Educational Equity and Social Justice, whereas the Marion City Schools seeks to be a leader in overcoming racial injustice and other forms of discrimination. And whereas the mission of Marion City Schools is to inspire a community of achievement. And whereas we continue to be mindful of our rich history while acknowledging the American history of racism, slavery, and policies that have negatively impacted the African American community. Someone chime in, please.
And whereas we believe that the racial injustice and other forms of discrimination have become a public health crisis, and whereas we recognize that public education can both enhance individuals and strengthen the community. And whereas we believe in fostering equity, inclusion, tolerance, dignity, and equal rights for students of color, and for all students. And whereas we believe that all people, regardless of their race, color, religion, sex, national origin, ancestry, disability, age, sex orientation, or perceived sexual orientation, gender identify, socioeconomic status, or any other individual characteristic deserve to respect and appreciated. And I'm going to push it on to Ted.
And whereas through advocacy, community engagement, and professional development, we seek to overcome social, cultural, and educational barriers that members of our community of color may experience. And whereas we believe we must directly confront issues of racism, inequity, and social injustice in order to alleviate the inequitable practices and outcomes these issues spawn. And whereas we believe that by working together, we can create a more socially just and equitable environment in which to live, work, and educate our youth.
Therefore, be it resolved, the Marion City Schools District Board of Education resolves to commit to promote social justice by, among other things, supporting efforts of educators to teach about social injustice and discrimination, all forms with regard to race, ethnicity, culture, gender expression, age, appearance, ability, national origin, language, spiritual belief, sexual orientation, socioeconomic circumstances, and environment. Listening with the intent to understand how social injustice impacts the lives of those around us.
Opposing policies that reinforce inequitable learning opportunities for outcomes for students of color and other special circumstances. Advocating for equitable employment and education practices that reinforce dignity, success, and democracy. Acknowledging the negative impact that social injustice plays in the experiences of students and adults from all walks of life. Admitting that words are no longer sufficient and that active engagement is required if we are to overcome social injustice in all its forms.
All right, if I can get a motion, please.
Madam President, I move to adopt the resolution.
I will second that.
Thank you. All right, discussion?
Madam Chairman, I would just like to again express appreciation to those who have brought this to us this evening, and would like to say that it's really action time, and I think we've had enough talk over a long period of time, and that we should remember in everything that we do to think about the social justice that is inherent in whatever they are, whether it's a policy or a hiring or behavioral matters in the district with students, and to just make sure that everything we do, we think about the social justice that is inherent in what we do day in and day out. So I fully support this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. So, and just a reminder to the other board members that the email that went out for Wednesday, the town hall through LSBA, there is a social justice webinar that is going to take place. But I would also, as board members, I would like some additional diversity training. I know Johnny has mentioned it in other conversations that, you know, some type of training for board. I know we mentioned it last month with the culture training. But if there's any training us as a board that we could receive, I'm definitely open for that as well. All right. So
I agree, Leslie.
okay, we'll roll call, please.
Mr. Imes,
Yes.
Mr. McCreary,
Yes.
Mr. McInnes,
Yes.
Mrs. McKay,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Okay, resolution approved.
Congratulations to all of us.
Yes.
you.
All right, next we will move on to the treasurer's report. For board minute approval, Treasurer Reinhardt recommends the approval of board minutes from May 21st and May 27th, 2020.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McCreary.
Second?
Can I get a second? Oh, Kelly, you second that. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Any further discussion? If not, board minutes are approved.
We need a vote.
Oh, yep. Sorry about that.
Sorry. Mr. McInnes,
Please.
Yes.
Mr. McCreary,
Yes.
Mr. Imes,
Yes.
Mrs. McKay,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Motion carried. Next, we'll move on to the financial approvals. Treasurer Reinhardt recommends the approval of the following financial items. They were all sent to us in attachment form. The May 2020 financial reports, fiscal year 20 appropriations, fiscal year 20 revenue revisions, fiscal year 20 estimated transfers and advances, set temporary appropriations at 25% of fiscal year 20, end year transactions, which allows the treasurer to approve any necessary year-end transactions as needed to modify all budget accounts to bring into balance amend appropriations all funds and advance monies to all funds with deficit balance on June 30th, 2020. Advances to the changes will be reported at the July meeting along with final appropriations and revenues if necessary. Motion, please.
Also move.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Imes. Discussion? Okay, no discussion. Roll call, please.
Yes.
Mr. McInnes,
Yes.
Mrs. McKay,
Yes.
Mr. Imes,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Motion carried. Next on the agenda is the hearing of the public. I do not believe we had any
No.
submitted. All right, we'll move on to old business. None. So on to new business line items. Dr. Irucci recommends.
We need to approve the agenda.
Oh, wait, am I? Oh, sorry. I didn't flip my page over.
No, don't worry.
Okay.
So
Additions or deletions?
There are none.
None. Okay.
In that case, I will move to approve the agenda as printed.
I'll second.
Or whoever got that.
Thank you, Kelly. Discussion? None? Roll
Mr.
call,
McInnes?
Yes.
Mrs. McKay?
Yes.
Mr. McCurry?
Yes.
Mr. Imes?
Yes.
Mrs. Schneider?
Yes. Motion carried. Now we'll move on to new business. Line items that the superintendent and treasurer are authorized to enter into an agreement to negotiate a lease with the city of Marion for the use of the rec center to partner with community agencies to provide services to residents of Marion County for 1 year. Marion City Schools will reimburse the city for utility costs for that year. Motion, please.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Kelly.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. McInnes. Discussion?
Although this resolution and recommended action is for 1 year, I would like for the superintendent and treasurer to have the ability to negotiate terms that are consistent with what the city would like to have there. And I'm willing to accept it the way it is, but I just wanted to voice that I think if to the superintendent and treasurer, if they come back with different terms, please advise us of what that might take to, because I think a community resource center is a very important project that Marion City Schools could take the lead in and bring to the table other partners. And when we talk about resource center, we talk about many kinds of activities that could go on there, from a clothing locker to food distribution, to be mental health facilities, to medical of any kind. I think this would be a center for the community that would be in a location that would be very accessible to many in our district, but the entire city of Marion. So I hope the superintendent and treasurer can work something out there with the city on that.
Thank you, Ted, for that. Any other discussion? All right, if not, we'll move on to the roll call, please.
Mrs. McKay?
Yes.
Mr. McInnes?
Yes.
Mr. McCurry?
No.
Mr. Imes?
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder?
Yes. Motion carried. All right, we'll move on to the new business agreements and contracts. So I'll, if it's okay, I'll read the recommended action, but then we'll vote all in one. Okay.
Mhm.
Dr. Irucci recommends the approval of the agreement between Marion City Schools and Specialized Education of Ohio to provide appropriate education program for 2 Marion City School students from March 9th, 2020 to June 30th, 2020. Next is the NWEA MAP. Dr. Irucci recommends the approval of an agreement between Marion City Schools and NWEA for assessment and testing services for the 2021 school year. Item C, Apex Learning. Dr. Irucci recommends the approval of an agreement between Marion City Schools and Apex Learning to provide digital curriculum. Item D, Power Scholars Academy MOU. Dr. Irusi recommends the approval of an MOU between Marion City Schools and the Marion Family YMCA to provide qualified teachers for the Power Scholars Academy. Item E, Workers' Comp Group Retrospective Rating Program. Dr. Irusi recommends the approval for an agreement between Marion City Schools and Sheckley to participate in the Workers' Compensation Group Retrospective Rating Program at an annual fee of $1,685. Motion, please.
I'll move to approve all those resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Imes.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. McCreary. Discussion? All right, no discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Imes,
Yes.
Mr. McCreary,
Yes.
Mrs. McKay,
Yes.
Mr. McInnes,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Motion carried. Move on to the new business consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered by the board to be routine and will be enacted by the board in one motion in the form listed below. There will be no discussion of these items prior to the time the board votes on the motion unless members of the board, staff, and public request specific items to be discussed and removed for the consent agenda. The superintendent recommends approval of all consent agenda items. Employment is specifically conditioned on and subject to successful background checks, receipt and final administrative review of all application records, and receipt of all other necessary documentations.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Kelly. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Imes. Any discussion? Okay, no discussion. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McKay,
Yes.
Mr. Imes,
Yes.
Mr. McInnes,
Yes.
Mr. McCreary,
Yes.
and Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Motion carried. All right. Next, we'll move on to board announcements. Our next board meeting will be on July 20th at 6 p.m. I'm assuming Zoom at this time, but if it is different, we will definitely
Okay.
inform the public. And then on to committee reports. It's my understanding we would like to get some dates on the calendar for all the committees.
Buildings and grounds, Kelly. You name it. I can do any of it.
That will be Wednesday from 2 to 4 is the last update I got.
This Wednesday or next
Yeah.
Wednesday?
Yes, this Wednesday.
Coach Max, is that okay with you?
I didn't think. I thought we were going more in the morning, but
Yeah, I did too. That was the last email that I got.
I got to check Wednesday. I never even put that in at that times.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I can do anything this week.
One of the main reasons we're trying to schedule this meeting around is we want to actually bring some folks in to have some conversations with you guys about the facilities audit that we did, and then we
Right.
also have another organization that came in and talked to us a little bit about some possible savings. There's some things we're doing with buildings and facilities, so we're trying to work around a couple other people, but we can try what best we can to reschedule that if
it's gonna
necessary.
be- I got a board meeting at Tri Rivers. Kind of pushed me.
Okay. Let me work with Adam on that, and I will reach out to Kelly and Coach Mack, and we'll get it scheduled. Okay.
Sorry, I was talking away and I was muted. As far as communications, do we want to get something on the schedule for that, or?
Probably a good idea if we kind of work to, I think Allerton would be more than happy to jump in on any time that we need to do that.
Mr. Imes and Mr. McGinnis, you guys are the ones on the committee.
I can schedule that. Do we schedule that with Jennifer at Allerton?
Yeah,
that'd be fine.
Okay. I'll reach out to her.
Gary and Ted, that's you guys at morning, afternoon, evening. What do you prefer there?
I'm pretty wide open. Only the week of July 5th will I not be available.
Okay.
I guess generally late morning, early afternoons are better.
Okay.
Not Wednesday.
Not the 24th?
Okay.
No, I'm not available on Wednesdays.
Okay. Okay. I will reach out to her and get a couple of times, and then I'll schedule that.
All right. Thanks, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard anything about an extracurricular meeting. I would think this would be a good time to do it before everything starts in the fall.
Yeah, we really, have just now really starting to have conversations about extracurriculars because we were really on hold with all of those kinds of things. Again, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago if we were going to have any extracurriculars, I would have said absolutely not. But again, that was another question. And as we see now, baseball is starting up and some of the facilities are now opening up, and we are definitely moving in that direction. Our coaches are working with our kids now with skills training in the contact sports, and actually our non-contact sports are actually starting to get together and starting to hold practices under the CDC or health department regulations and guidelines. So, I would think if we want, as we get maybe in July, that's probably, I would hope we would have a lot more information on that, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
All right.
I know we just recently had insurance and finance policy, obviously. So, diversity and equity would be something that we want to talk about as probably early in July as well.
Yeah, I'm available in the mornings, preferably. And any morning really works at this time.
Coach Mack, you're on that committee too. We'll just kind of communicate that to you. Is it?
Well, which one's that there, Coach?
That's the Diversity and Equity Committee.
Yes, sir.
Morning's okay for you, Coach?
Yeah.
Okay.
Much better.
Do you want me to set that one up, Ron?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. And that one was Leslie and Coach Mac.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
In morning.
Yeah, preferably.
Okay. Okay.
Got a date, or you'll get to us?
Yes, I'll send a couple of things out tomorrow if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
That works.
Mhm.
All right. Did we hit?
I would like to schedule a curriculum meeting and get an update with Ben. I
Okay.
think our literacy plan calls for a monthly report to the board. But I don't know how we're going to handle that, but I'd like to get some updates and just a committee meeting as well.
Okay. I'll talk to him, and that is Ted and who? I'm sorry.
Kelly,
Okay. And is there a preference on times?
Nope.
Okay. Kelly, do you have a?
Usually early morning is best for me.
Okay.
I can usually schedule around it.
Okay. Okay.
All right. I think we're all covered, right?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to information and discussion items. The first reading for the board policy updates. Dr. Irusi recommends the first reading of the following board policies. Employment administrators, gifted education and identification, employment of professional staff, employment of substitutes, employment of personnel in summer school and adult education programs, employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities, employment of classified staff, employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities, employment contract, drug and alcohol testings of CDL license holders and other employees who perform safety-sensitive functions, graduation requirements, students at risk of not qualifying for a high school diploma, and authorization to accept and distribute electronic records and use of electronic signatures, which Mrs. Lawson gave us a good update on all those. So a motion, please.
I don't believe that takes.
No, you're right. Just
You're
routine.
right.
Sorry.
I would ask the board if they have any thoughts about credits for graduation. Some time ago, we moved to 21 credits. The thought at that point was to, I think, as I recall, to make Harding High School have a more rigorous set of requirements. But I understand the high school staff wishes to go to 20 credits, and we did that during the pandemic, the emergency resolution. Maybe Mrs. Lawson can speak to us about the pros and cons of and the thoughts that went into that from the committee. I think the committee is, as I recall, the policy committee is recommending that we go with 20. And so I wanted just the rest of the board to be aware of that we're dropping one credit from requirements, which still meets with state law.
Mm-hmm.
It does. So, interestingly enough, we actually met about these policies in March, and we're planning to make the recommendation to the board to move to the 20 credits, and then obviously we had to present to the board a little bit prematurely because we needed to with the change in graduation requirements due to COVID, which then we asked that change be made in any way. So currently we are at 20 credits. So actually what we would have needed to do if we wanted to go back to the 21 is actually change the policy back to 21 because now we're at 20. So just because of timing wise with this policy. So we were at 21 credits and really that additional credit was just being used as an elective. So there was really, there may have been more historical information, although it was not currently in any administrative guidelines or in the policy as to any reason why we had that additional credit. So we can certainly ask that there be additional requests made of our graduating seniors without adding it to be a credit, by adding additional seals or anything like that, again, without putting it in as a credit. We can also put them in administrative guidelines, which doesn't require board action. So some things to think about without changing the graduation requirements back to the 21 credits.
Okay.
And the thought for going to 20 was simply that the elective was something that was not being used efficiently or unnecessary. I'm just curious of the thought behind.
Yeah, so right, there's really no intentionality at this point. We've talked about various things, but right now there's no intentional plan for that. So students are using it as just I hate to say just an elective, but it's being used as an elective. So there are certainly districts that use it for things like community service, credentialing, some of the things that are now in place in terms of the graduation seal, things like that. But though that right now, the way it's set up, it is just an elective. So, it's really sort of at the customer's choice as to how they're using it. So without a different plan, our recommendation would be to go to the 20. And then if we want, obviously to put something different in a graduation plan, we certainly can do that. But the choice would, the recommendation right now would be just to go to the 20 credits.
And I think rigor can be shown and demonstrated through the number of students that are taking College Credit Plus. Maybe they're doing college algebra, composition 1, composition 2. They're taking AP courses. They're doing advanced science, advanced math at the high school level. So in my mind, that's how you establish rigor rather than just putting on another credit.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, Kelly, and I think that with our pathway development and the credentialing, students are actually putting more time into those credentials and so forth than just a mere credit. So I think it's a wise choice as well to give students the flexibility to seek out those credentials. So.
Right.
If you recall a year ago, probably about this time last year and going into August, when the state at that point had reverted back to the original graduation requirements and the 18 points that were going to be required of students, and without many options at that point, we had worked very hard in the district to institute more credentialing programs for our kids and really have an emphasis on students passing the work keys. And we put a lot of time and effort into that. I know Marsha Pitts and the Gear Up crew really worked really hard on that. And at that point, we had discussions about making that 21st credit somehow aligned to the credentialing issue, because it was very beneficial for our students in our community to graduate with a credential that they could use immediately upon graduation. So I feel really good about the fact that because we have our seals now, which includes in our pathways those credentialing requirements, and students have to actually have to have, in addition to the credits, the 20 credits, they actually have to graduate with at least 2 seals in order to qualify for them. And so, I feel really good about us, reducing the credits to 20 and putting a little bit more of that focus and emphasis on different areas that students can excel in.
Very good point. Very good point.
Mm-hmm.
And Ted, I may be wrong, but I also think part of the discussion about the 21 credits had to do some with community service as well. I think that was maybe before we had the programs that we're conducting now regularly anyway. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right. All good discussion.
Leslie, before you close this section,
Sure.
Thinking about, I typically provide those updates for the board in relation to the literacy plan on a regular basis, but this might be a good standing kind of place for information and discussion items for us to specifically talk about literacy. So if we want to add that as kind of a part of the agenda, because our reading achievement plan, talks about information, but we can make it actually public at the board meeting. If this is, if that's the pleasure of the board, I'd be more than willing to add that as under either information on a regular basis, so it's just there all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Well, I do have somewhat of an update, and I'll just be brief in this. So we have 3 areas of focus. We've been working on establishing 100-day plans within the district. Actually, really excited to have Doug Reeves, who is the author of the Equity and Excellence book that many of our employees, which you all have a copy of too, is working with us to develop 100-day plans. So within literacy, we are looking at breaking the plan down into 3 areas of focus in the next 100 days are to find and implement a phonics program. We're very close to that. We are working on our teachers developing rubrics for nonfiction writing. That's another emphasis that is in the plan. And then we are in the process of finding an appropriate screener that can align with the 5 big ideas of reading, which is also in the plan. So those are our 3 areas in the 100-day plan that we will be focused on getting ready to start school. In addition to all of the, continuing to build on the phonemic awareness and the other parts of the MTSS part and all that as well.
Does the screener we select, is that a program that is computer-based, or what's that look like in real time?
Yeah, so we're currently sort of using NWEA as our screener. It has multiple purposes. So there are other actual more diagnostic screeners out there. The NWEA is really a predictor on how our kids are going to do with the 3rd grade reading guarantee. And as you progress up through grades 3 through 8, it's a predictor on how well they'll do on OSTs, which is good. It's good information to know. But as far as literacy is concerned, some of these assessments, and that's what they are, they're not really programs, they're assessments. And there are multiple forms of the assessments. They can be electronic, especially in the kindergarten and 1st grade. They're basically teacher-driven type of assessments. After you get past 2nd grade, then there are actually some computer assessments where the kids take on their own. So there are multiple forms of them. But what we're really concerned about is making sure that we are able to diagnose where kids are at. For example, if they're struggling in phonics, the screener will tell us that that's an area of emphasis. Whereas right now, they just, most of the screeners we have are geared towards whether kids can comprehend text or not. So we need to dive deeper into the root cause analysis of why kids are struggling. And that's what these screeners are intended to do.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for that. All right. Is there any need to go into executive session? Nope. All right. With that, I move to adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:15.
We need a motion on that.
Motion, please.
So made.
Second.
Second.
Good job.
Thank you, Gary. All right. Roll call, please.
Mr. Imes,
Yes.
Mr. McCreary,
Yes.
Mr. McInnes,
Yes.
Mrs. McKay, Mrs. Snyder.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Done.
It's adjourned.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody. Good night. Thanks again, John.
Yes. Thank you, John.